I wanted to thank everybody for coming to our first CRAN of 2021. We're really excited this year. We have a pretty good lineup already into the first few months, and we're really excited about our first tour today by Furman and Keil. I want to thank our sponsors, Exclusive Windows and Doors, and Design Pay. And we have both of them on the call right now. So Chris and Ryan, if you guys want to introduce yourselves, please unmute and tell us hello.
Hello, everyone. Ryan Camordo. I'm an account manager with Design Pay.
And Chris, you're muted.
Chris Brown with Exclusive Windows and Doors. Thanks a bunch for allowing us to sponsor CRAN again, and looking forward to a great year.
Thank you both so much. And now I'm going to let Drew take it away. Thank you.
While Drew's getting the video going, I'll introduce myself. This is Philip Keil with Furman and Keil Architects, and joined today by some rock stars from my staff, Troy Miller and Drew Wilson. First of all, thanks to AIA Austin for hosting this, Mari for your leadership on the CRAN committee, Julia for your kind of unflagging support as awesome staff. And thanks to our sponsors as well. Really appreciate y'all's supporting AIA and CRAN. This was a special project for us, and I'll kind of introduce our team and then let Drew and Troy take over. Mark Whaling with, you guys probably all know Mark because he's been a long time advocate for and supporter of AIA Austin through his company, Austin Concrete Development. In fact, I got to know Mark through the AIA Austin, and he ended up hiring our firm to help him and his wife design a house over in Travis Heights on Hillside. And so today we're going to be talking about that house, really talking about the design genesis of it and all the crazy forces at work in the constraints, particularly the very constrained urban site. But we'll get into that in the presentation. But I really need to give Troy and Drew props on this. Troy and Drew from our office really took the lead on designing this house, making it really sing, integrating with our amazing consultants, including Sam Covey from Fort Structural Engineers, Blair Burton Interiors, and Jose Correa from Austin Outdoor Design. Them paired with Mark and Rosemary, fantastic clients, really made for a great project, very integrated on a very challenging site. One note about our clients, because they're kind of the reason we're all here. Mark is unusual as a client for us because he's a colleague in the trades industry, being a tradesman, he kind of knows the construction industry. He was not only our client for this, but he also acted as general contractor. So I'm sure you guys will have interesting questions for him as we get into it as well. Reminder that you can use the chat to ask questions, and we're going to leave some time at the end for a Q&A. But I will hand it over to Drew to kick us off on our presentation. Drew, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Our clients have been looking for a perfect spot to build for a long time. They had lived in Toronto and wanted a location that had an urban context, but still felt like a neighborhood. They also wanted to be able to walk out the front door and be at shops and restaurants within minutes. And when this lot on Hillside in Travis Heights came available, they moved quickly to get it. It had an existing small bungalow that was removed to make way for new construction that would take better advantage of the lot size. This starts to show the feel of the neighborhood with the tree-lined streets and smaller older homes on irregular shaped lots. There are several new builds mixed in as well. And notice the wedge shape of the lot as it narrows from the street to the back. And it also rises several feet in grade from the front to the back as well. This slide shows the challenge of the context of the neighborhood. We have a smaller, older bungalow to the right of the property and a large new construction to the left of the property. And we really wanted to find a strategy that split the difference in scale and still fit in the neighborhood.
Okay, I'll take over now. My name's Troy. So when we were starting the design, the Mark and Rosemary came in and really sort of said, we want the master bedroom, you know, on the back, the private part of the lot. We want the sort of living spaces towards the front of the lot that, you know, can engage the streetscape. And so we started sort of looking at all the sort of overlays that you get on these sort of urban lots. And the second sort of constraint we had is that I think there's like 15 feet of rise across from front to back as this lot narrows towards the east. And how do we take Subchapter F and all of the overlays and zoning and max out this lot? Another thing that the clients were sort of looking for was not necessarily a traditional house, but some of the traditional elements that sort of make an older neighborhood like this, and the bungalow to the south, you know, part of that sort of streetscape. Ideas of front porches, exposed eaves, gable roofs, not, you know, flat roof structures. And when we're sort of trying to add all of this up, and really what amounts to a large program, because the price and location of lots demand something very different now than it did when the 1,200 square foot bungalow on the south side was installed. And so how do you engage those ideas with sort of the modern idea and cost, you know, constraints of what a site wants to have now. And so this was, this and the next slide will be sort of two initial schemes that we sort of put together. One to sort of take to the city, and the Whalings were sort of being the contractors through the whole process, wanted to be a part of that process. And so we took both of these schemes to the city, and what we were really trying to do is see what was allowable under Subchapter F. And one particular element we were looking at is how do we use a basement? At some point, Mark made the mistake of telling us he had the equipment that he could cut, and digging was not a problem. And so we sort of took him up on that offer in these initial schemes and started looking at how do we sort of carve into the lot and use basement in a way that's still usable square footage. It's not sort of bound underground with no access to the exterior. And what kind of spaces can we put down there that then on a main level, which is really the idea of this sort of where you have all of the living spaces and the master suite is this sort of unified one level plan with some guest bedrooms up, and then auxiliary elements, maybe ideally putting them in that basement. One of the things we found out, and one of the things we were worried about going in, is cut and fill. And this is in an urban watershed, and in urban watersheds, the 4-foot cut fill rule goes away. You can cut as much as you want, which allowed us to do certain things that we'll see as we sort of move on into the next slides. Geometrically, we were trying to sort of how to use this wedge lot. And so we were laying it out so that, you know, part of the structure was parallel to the northern border, part of it was parallel to the southern border boundary of the lot. And this slide sort of shows, and you can see that this was only, a week later, we're sort of moving through this schematic design process pretty rapidly, at least for our normal time frame. And one thing that happened in that week is the client went and spent some time on the lot, and they realized that where they really gravitated to in terms of hanging out and living was towards the back of the lot, because it felt much more private. The scale of the houses that are around, both that it backs up to and that are to either the north or south, really the scale of those houses was much lower, and so it felt much more serene, less urban, less confined by the structures around it. And so it brought about this idea of moving the living spaces to the back of the lot, bringing the master suite to the front of the lot, and looking at how we used the sort of cutting into the hill to create privacy for that master suite as we enter the building. And then the next step, if we go to the next slide, was looking at it, starting to think about how are we going to mask this structure, and is there ways to sort of clean up the geometry so that they're a little more integrated, where before it was sort of two orthogonal structures oriented to the two divergent property lines. Can we take those two geometries and start weaving them together, which is what we started to do here. As we sort of went through this process, and I think the next slide, if we go to that, which is just the upper level, and again, sort of starting with this sort of cut-in basement level, sort of how do you start to layer this structure and use those different elements, not only horizontally in plan, but sort of vertically, and tie them together, which goes into, if you'll go to the next slide, Drew, back to this sort of front of the house, where on the right side, you'll see that sort of grayish box that alludes to the bungalow that's there, the much larger, newer contemporary house on the left, and mitigating that with our structure, which is now, a 3-story structure. And the goal was, from the street side, it really is perceived as a 1-story structure that is that master wing, sort of moving up the hill to this sort of reconstructed front porch. It's on the front of the house. It doesn't necessarily face the front of the house. Sort of brings you up to an entry that's sort of very clear, even though it's, 10 feet out of grade at the street from the streetscape. And also, and this will become apparent more as we start to look at the 3D, we have these sort of walls that are vanishing to a point towards the back of the lot. And how do you put a roof on that gable roof structure and make it feel like those older houses? And what we sort of found out as we were modeling this is, if you just keep the plates the same, these roofs can sort of crawl and become gables that come out of gables, and your ridge line ends up sloping, but you really don't ever perceive that as you're moving around the house. And so in a lot of ways, it feels very regular. And that allowed us to achieve, if we look at, what is the left of the page, that lower roof gable of the master wing comes and really slides up into that larger gable over the 2-story structure. And then within Subchapter F, starting to use all the tools of, dormers and what those are allowed to sort of slip it under the tent. The other element that we were trying to do is keep the mass of the house in the center. And as we move out to the places where you exist outside of the house, the structure becomes a one-story element that's at a much more human scale. So when you're up against it, even though part of the structure is 3 stories and a very large volume, when you're outside, when you're engaging the house in the spaces within, you never really feel that, except for maybe the one point at the stairwell, which is really that vertical connector through the house. And as you can see, we even, as we went through this process, the basement actually allowed us to add additional elements as we moved through. So the program became even bigger when we got to this point, just because by using and twisting the building into the regulations, particularly the basement relief from FAR, allowed us to have a guest room, a storage area where we contained all of our mechanical equipment, a bathroom if you enter off of that sort of sunken level, and then even a media room on the upstairs level for the client. And if we go to the next slide, Drew. This sort of shows the tent and how we sort of slipped all of these structures underneath it. One idea was that as we got into this upper structure, to keep the scale down, is to really use, again, using those gables to reduce the additional size that the 3rd level really adds to the project by breaking it down into dormers and really it being fully functional, but it really has a little bit of it slipped into the attic, even though we weren't using the attic exemption for FAR. And you can also see in this slide, sort of, it lays out the square footage we were able to gain really by using the basement exemption. From an allowable square footage, which was right around the 2,800 to 2,900 square feet of FAR per building permit that we had. Really, the house itself has, in that 3,600 to 4,000 square foot range of interior conditioned space that is really, what people want out of these urban lots, I think, just because of the cost. It's really hard to get all of the function and programming they want out of that structure. And this really shows how we stepped up the lot. We ran into a bunch of issues in terms of how basement is calculated, how tall can the ceiling heights be on that lower level, and still get that continuous main level from the master all the way out to the living room and the outdoor room, and how much did we want to cut on the high side of the lot. And so through discussions with the Whalings, they gave us 2 steps. And you can see in the middle there, as you come in from the porch into the entry, there's 2 steps that lead up into that sort of backspace. Another element that sort of the house creates is, because we're on this really sort of narrow wedge of lot with a fairly large structure, is that we're not, there's windows that face south to collect light, but really most of the spaces allow views towards the long longitudinal axis of the lot. So, and when you're in different places on that main level, you're really looking out into the open space of the lot, or the open space of the streetscape, as opposed to sort of looking out onto your neighbor's property. If you want to sort of move on to the next slide. This sort of shows that stair is sort of the circulation volume, how we sort of tucked, on that upper level, we're sort of tucking it in where we had some low plates, but still, really provides, I think, some nice and interesting geometries that, you know, are cleaned up just enough that the house feels comfortable. And you really don't necessarily perceive the sort of some of the craziness that's created by having the walls that splay towards each other and the dipping ridge lines. And then again, just to the left of the stairs, the sort of entry door, part of the issue was getting people past that master, and which really, once you enter, you sort of see all the way back through the dining room, through the living room, out to the outdoor room, even to the pool. And so the sort of natural flow is to sort of move that direction away from the master suite. Again, this is just, you know, maybe shows a little bit more of the stepping down of scale as you get to the back of the lot. Really, the living room and outdoor room are sort of one part of the mass of the structure that, you know, drops down to sort of one story kind of pavilion. So when you're outside in the pool or in the sort of smaller yard to the south of the structure, you're really just next to this sort of one story building. Ideally, that's sort of a very comfortable space where sort of all of that area feels like, with all of the glass on the living room, sort of feels like one space.
So this, we made some videos. We know the best part of the CRAN tour is actually seeing the house. So we made this video to capture some of the unique spatial qualities of the house.
That house right there was on a homes tour a couple of years ago.
Here we are on Hillside Avenue with the steps leading up to the front porch and the driveway cutting down into the site to the carport. This is the front porch entry, which is up off the street, 7 feet. This is the entryway. That leads into the dining room and the kitchen. That leads into the living room and flows out to the back porch and backyard and the pool. And this is the master bedroom. And the master bathroom. To the laundry room, powder room, coat closet, and then there's the stairwell that goes from the bottom floor all the way to the second floor. The second floor has a small media room with a wet bar. And 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. We are back at the main level now and going down to the basement level. Where there is a large mechanical room here and an additional bedroom and bathrooms. And then from this level, it leads out to the carport.
Okay, our next video is Sam Covey from Porch Structures, and he's going to talk a little bit about the complexities of the structural engineering.
Hi, I'm Sam Covey, structural engineer from Porch Structures. I had a fun time working on this interesting project with Mark as the owner and builder and Furman and Keil as the architect. There were a lot of interesting structural challenges. Probably the most visible one that we can see is at this end of the building where there's not much wall exposed and it's all just glazing all the way around and then an open porch. And so the tricky portion of this is just making sure that the building is adequately braced from the wind load pushing. So typically in a normal house, you would have wood shear walls or some sort of bracing. But since we wanted a completely open, transparent look to show, the openness from interior to exterior, we created a moment frame of these small braced small steel members all welded together to make a stiff frame. And that happens both at this window wall and then at the fireplace to laterally brace the wall. Up above for the framing, we have all exposed structural framing, and we had to keep all the members as small as possible to give it a nice exposed look and to hide the connections. So there's a little bit of intricacy that goes into each one of these bolted connections to allow for the correct structural capacity, but have it not look overly large. One of the other challenges with this project was the constrained site. So most of the site area is developed, and both lot lines on either side are at an angle. And so as the house comes back into the lot, it tapers. And as you have tapering walls coming together, your framing up above can't stay flat. So it also has to pitch down. So there's a lot of geometric tricks which aren't necessarily visible when you're in the project, but to coordinate the drawings and the details actually took a lot of time and effort to verify that everything was in the correct location. And of course, the construction was also challenging with all the different angles. So another challenge at the front of the house is this very large glazed window right here. So similar to the back where we don't have much lateral bracing for the building, here, due to this large window, we had to incorporate a small steel frames around, but we were able to keep that small enough so that it's not visible. Another interesting part of coordination was getting all these exposed connections and all the steel framing to be clearly welded without any visible bolts. And then the tabs holding down the wood rafters at the top to be very consistent and cleanly detailed. Here you can see an exposed steel staircase. And if you notice, the stringer is off center from the treads. And that's due to stay out of the critical root zone, which I'm sure we all have to deal with because of the City Austin critical root zone regulations. But it's always easier if you can just stay out of the half CRZ critical root zone instead of in it. So part of this decision was to offset the structure and then cantilever over the critical root zone instead of trying to do an air spaded pier within the half critical root zone. Another interesting aspect of the stair, which is not built today, but it'll be all concrete, floating concrete formed up over a steel embed plate. And if you pan over here and look at this, it's basically an upside down steel base plate that is pointed up because they're going to form out the concrete and pour the concrete on top of that to give the step a floating look.
Our next video is of our client and the general contractor, Mark Whaling, and he's going to share some of his experience being both client and contractor.
Hey, Drew, come on. I'm Mark Whaling, and I'm the builder on this project. It's been a labor of love with Troy and Drew and Philip. This is my personal house. My wife and I have been planning this now for this build for about 3 years now. It's been that long. Time flies, for sure. You know, from a client kind of builder perspective, I think that this build has been maybe a little bit different than what other builders and architects who have got a client. It's where you're the client, as well as the builder. What we were able to do, I think, in a shorter period of time, is to kind of compress the initial kind of month or two. From what I recall, we really flipped this entire program around completely, as you may see in some of the other materials that Drew and Troy and Philip put out there. Super thrilled with how it's come together. The thing of it is, it's kind of terrifying in the moment because you really never know what's a great idea or what's going to end up being, not a great idea, throwaway idea. And it's incremental, right? As you're into it, it's just incremental. But really happy with the team, Sam and Austin Outdoor Design, the landscape firm on it. Everybody pitched in kind of at each step with an idea here. It was like a nudge in this direction and a nudge in that direction. And after 2 or 3 months, like I said, the whole program just changed. A real 180 change in the program, and it's turned out great. We're thrilled with it.
And our last video is Rich Ponce, who is Mark's business partner at Austin Concrete. And he's going to talk about the technique used for the board form concrete walls and the texture that they achieved with that.
Hi, I'm Rich Ponce, and I'm with Austin Concrete Development. And I work with Mark Whalen, who's the builder and owner of this property, and who is also my business partner. We performed the board form concrete walls and the slab on grade, but from an architectural perspective, these board form walls. Were designed based off of the inspirations and visions of Mark and his architect, Philip, at Furman, Keil. And what we've done to execute these walls is a pretty basic process of selecting a fir 1x material, which we sandblasted in our shop to execute the grain showing more on the finish. And we use fiberglass ties, which conceal the wall tie systems that some prefer to see, not to see, so that the wall looks clean and you don't see those ties. And then we just we made sure we executed our mix designs on these walls based on the time of the year and the temperatures. These walls were executed all in the heat of the summer, so we really had to put a lot of detail into our mix designs so that we maintained the proper slumps, so that the walls, without adding water and keeping the mix as rich and high in its slump, but without using the water. So that was always, that's the biggest challenge here in the South and in Austin, is making sure that we can keep the recipe for our concrete so that it works with the extreme temperatures, which we were able to do. And we also put a lot of detail into the formwork in regards to making sure that all of our joints on the bottoms and at the sides are sealed with gaskets and then caulked. And using the proper form releases is also very critical, because certain form releases don't work the same. And if they're used, when you remove the forms, it'll delaminate that initial finish, and it'll pull the finish off. So that was very carefully planned and a process that we've learned over many years, that certain products work better than others in regards to executing and achieving keeping the walls clean when the forms are removed. But and then of course just the workmanship from our carpenters is empirical. These guys got to take their time and understand that that the carpentry that goes into this Furman is just as detailed as any of the carpentry that's going in inside the finish work. So the labor and the carpenters buy in on understanding that, and that is extremely important at executing these walls. And from my perspective, I think they were executed and accomplished what Mark and his design team were looking for, at least to my knowledge. And so I hope that that they're happy, and I hope that this conversation is informative to where it'll help you with your future projects. Okay, so as we're looking in closer at these walls, you can probably see better the texturing from the wood grain, and to speak to that a little further, we to achieve that, what we did is we sandblasted these 1x in our shop with a it was a light sandblast with a real fine blasting sand. We didn't want to do too heavy. Now that the heavier you go is in direct proportion on how heavy the grain shows. And so this is what we chose in regards to a mock-up we did for Mark, and he was happy with this grain pattern and its intensity. So that's how this was determined, and it was done again with the light sandblast and light blasting sand, and then oiled. We oiled it with the Crete Lease 880 is the product that we use that works well for these type of walls and any architectural type walls. And then the fiberglass wall ties, sometimes these little imperfections is just from the extreme temperature swings from when we were poured through seasons, and the heat and cold, and they expand and contract, and those are just little detailing things that we will be needing to touch up as the project gets finished. So that's kind of the makeup of the texturing of the boards.
And that was our last video, and that concludes our presentation. And we can now open it up to the viewers for questions or discussion.
Great. That was really great. Thank you for that presentation. There was a few coming in. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning, though. Philip, you had answered part of this question, but Travis had also asked how you guys dealt with the window well for egress in the basement guest room, residing in the 5-foot building setback, and what kind of issues you had with the city or how you worked around that.
Travis, thanks for asking those questions. There's great questions, and I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of the permitting for this. I know Keenan Smith also kind of chimed in and asked about permitting and all that. But first question, I don't know if everybody has been paying attention to the chat, but Travis asked about cut and fill requirements and how did we get away from the 4-foot restriction on cut and fill. We were fortunate on this site in that it was in the urban watershed, and there is a rule that if you're in the urban watershed and the building has engineered retaining walls, you can do more than 4-foot cut and fill. So it was really, that was something we discovered. We had one of our early questions with the city that we addressed with them right as we were getting into this project, because we knew that was going to be an issue. I will say in general, and Troy and Drew, jump in if you want to say anything about this, or Mark as well, having early access to the city. We took some of those very early schematic design sketches that Troy was talking about at the beginning of the presentation to the city for a paid plan review, and had questions that we emailed them in advance. The three of us and Mark went to the city with kind of a big list of our questions about how they were going to interpret different things about the basement and the cut and fill and impervious cover, all these different things. And it was great to have that input with the city. We also did the expedited plan review as part of this project. And again, that was really useful to have everybody sitting at the same table. This is fortunately pre-COVID, so we could actually sit at the same table. Everybody sitting at the same table. So if the reviewers had any questions, or if we had any questions, we could address them right there during the permitting process. Drew, Troy, Mark, do you guys have anything else to add about that permitting stuff?
No, other than the specific question about the window well, because we didn't have a cut and fill issue, the window well was landscaping, and it wasn't. I don't know if there was something about it. Yeah, and the egress window actually wasn't that window. There's a separate egress window that opens up to the driveway, which served as our egress window. So we didn't have to have, you know, any stair or access to the actual window well. It was really just to provide light.
Great. The next question was curious about the HVAC strategies and solutions given design configurations, open spaces, and exposed structure. Thanks.
Well, as Troy talked about earlier, we carved out space in the basement for a rather large HVAC closet. And that really helped in terms of, you know, getting the mechanical equipment kind of shoehorned into this building. Troy, do you want to address this question in terms of, like, you know, any other, you know, again, this BIM model really helps us understand the spatial implications, like where to thread things through from what attic space. Troy, why don't you take this question?
Sure. And so again, a lot of the HVAC equipment is sort of down in the sort of basement level where you see the sort of closet doors on the far right of the basement level. We had a chase that sort of ran up through so we could go up through the core of the house and run ducts through the floor, either underneath the master wing. Then we came up into the attic space where we do have an attic over the master wing and could take air and drop air into those spaces. When we get up to the sort of main level that you see here, we're running ductwork through the floor space into the kitchen area. And then where we have the exposed structured roof over the living room, we're just blowing out of the sidewall across the space towards that wall of glass on the east. And then we have, I believe, it's been a while since I looked at it, a unit in the upstairs attic that serves those two bedrooms and the media area. But we have places where we have sort of fur downs and ceilings, particularly at the master, to give us some tools and open up things so that we have a little more room to get the bigger ducts we needed to get through.
Mark, you can weigh in on how much cursing of the architects was done during the construction process.
Well, we twisted this house, so tightly into the lot, and I think to the specific question about, the duct runs and getting, the conditioned air into the rooms that we needed to get it into, we were really kind of constrained, I guess, with, we would want to put rigid ducts in some areas, but we had to, abandon that just because we just didn't have the space, in the truss system. So there's, regrettably, we had to install quite a bit more of the, the smaller 4 and 6 inch flexible lines just to get the volume of conditioned air, particularly kind of back from that air handling unit down in the basement back into the living room at the rear of the house. But there wasn't a whole lot of cursing of the architects. it is what it is. We knew it would be a tight installation or a difficult installation, and it was on the HVAC.
Mark, there's another question for you. In the video, you spoke about a 180-degree change in the program. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, it was. We really didn't expect to have the house end up the way it is. It was interesting. This is the first time my wife and I have actually built a house, and you have these preconceptions as to how you're going to live in the home or how you want the home to sit, you know, on the site. And I think it was a point that Troy brought up earlier. My wife and I spent considerable amount of time sort of in that July, August initial 2-month period on site, and I would encourage anyone watching today to encourage their clients to go ahead and do that, because it really allowed, I guess, for us to think about how to change the design in ways that, you know, we really didn't originally have the living room at the back. I think is Troy or Drew mentioned, the living room was originally at the front of the house. So as you can see, we've quite literally flipped this entire project from front to back and back to front. And because the lot is so deep, it's about a 260, 65 foot deep lot. And the homes in this part of Austin are the older homes or the existing homes. A lot of them are only 25 feet right from the curb, so they're pushed toward the street. And because the lots on to the back of this particular lot, it's equally as deep. So what you've essentially got in the backyard is a bit of a green belt, you know. And what we've been able to do here with the pool area and the open screen porch is just take advantage of an oak tree that's back there in a quiet green belt in Travis Heights. It's a special little pocket, I think, in Travis Heights. And I'm happy that we flipped the house and we have the living space in the back, and we took the advice of our architects. That's probably a lesson learned too. We listen to our architects.
Excellent. Dustin also had a question for you, Mark. Did you consider hiring a GC after some of the dust has settled? Are you happy with acting as your own GC? And what was the biggest lesson learned?
It's a good question. It's to, you know, anyone who's watching who's in construction. It depends on the day. I mean, some days I wouldn't have trusted a project this difficult. You know, it's difficult to entrust a project this complex to to others. There's countless little decisions that happen almost certainly each day, sometimes multiple decisions in a day. And it's that, at least if they're a good decision, I know that I've made them. And if they're a bad decision, I know, that I've made them, and I have to deal kind of with the consequences of making the bad decision. This isn't the first project that I've done. I certainly wouldn't have bitten this project off, as a first build. I've done some other spec projects here in town, but this is my first Furman and Keil project, and hopefully won't be my last. But I think my wife and I really just want to get this home, wrapped up, moved in, and enjoy it, and then maybe I'll get with Philip and we'll take stock as to what we're going to do, in the future next. But yeah, it's been a 2.5 year build, and COVID really slowed the project down, as you all can imagine. We're probably about maybe 2.5 months out right now, and we're grateful. I think that we can see the finish line because we're ready to be done.
Excellent. I think there was maybe one more question. Joseph asked if there were any unusual building code issues to address besides what has already been covered.
Troy, do you know, I mean, I don't think that there were any kind of unusual building code issues to address. You know, really it was just a puzzle at all times, just juggling all the zoning requirements, the impervious coverage. Believe it or not, we are towing the line at 45% on that. The FAR was a constant struggle. Like at every move, we had to basically stop and take stock of our square footages and our heights and our section and our plans, just to make sure that we were conforming to all the code issues, or all the zoning issues rather. Code issues, I don't think there was anything in particular that was a big challenge.
Yeah. Other than the normal sort of subchapter F sort of restrictions, everything I think came together, and it was really just knowing what all the restrictions are sort of early on, so that we could, you know, take advantage of them as much as possible and not view them as hindrances. But the thing that makes it hard is something coming up later that you didn't see coming. And I think we got all those things out of the way, so we knew what our envelope was.
So I think we basically figured out that in order to fit 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound sack, it really helps to dig a big hole in the ground and set the sack on that ground.
If I could add to the earlier question, for the next project, we're probably going to try to find a lot that is on diggable soil, because this entire lot from curb to back property line is limestone, and it's some of the hardest limestone that our company has encountered. And that's we've been doing projects here in Austin since the mid-90s. So the home is certainly on solid ground, but we took about 130 truckloads of material off this site in total. And yeah, that was effort. That was effort.
Excellent. Well, I don't see any more questions. Thank you guys so much. It was a really great presentation. Really appreciated all the slides and the videos. If nobody else has any questions, we will see you next month. Next month, we have Positive Energy doing a presentation for us on February 4th, first Thursday of the month. So we hope to see you all there again. Thank you again.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark. Thanks,
Okay.
Troy, Drew.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks, Troy. Thanks, Philip.
AIA.
And good job.
Great presentation. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Mary,
Yes.
do you have any idea how we can get CEU credit for this presentation?
Rob typically emails right afterwards with your certificate. Yes.
Very good.
It might take a day or two, but he should email you.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, you're welcome.